But I think there are a lot of people who are afraid to detach themselves from the victim narrative because once you do, what excuse do you have?
Yes.
Who do you blame?
Yes.
Right? And so it's more comfortable to stay in the mental oppression of victimhood than it is to exercise and live in your freedom. Welcome to Off Code, the show where we ignore the cultural codes and have real and intriguing conversations regarding the Black community and ways we can move forward to human flourishing.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Off Code. I am Monique Dusan.
And I am Kevin Briggins, and we are glad that you all are back with us again. Mo, this episode has been a long time coming.
It sure has. It's like the triplet that never came. Well, here it is.
Yep. So for those who don't know, we started a series going through a video on the history of Black America and talking about slavery, and we were just kind of reacting to it. And then kind of got broken up with other things that just emerged. And so we're going to jump back to that series today. And hopefully let's see how far we get and if we finish it up or not. So
I'm really thinking we were supposed to only do 3. So I'm hoping that we finish. But if not, it'll be next week.
Yeah. So if you guys haven't seen the other ones, go back and look for those. Our first reactions to the first parts of this video. And then, come back and check this one out, or just watch this one and then go back and watch that one,
Yes, I'm thinking we can link the videos in the description below.
Yep, absolutely. Down
yes. There. All right, yes. Okay, so let's get started. You put this one together. I was completely busy, so I'm just going to trust that you're going to show me all the things in this video. Help me understand. I know that this video does be triggering people. People be coming on the page
I should give a trigger warning.
You should.
This video is very non-PC.
It is.
And he's going to say some things that are controversial that we're going to talk about, and we should be able to talk about these things. But yeah, he does not hold back in his opinion or analysis or just saying things that are just facts. So,
all right, I'm ready for it.
All right, let's jump in.
One of the things Thomas Sowell writes out very eloquently is that lots of things which we associate with American Black culture, like dialect or certain antisocial behaviors, can be traced back to a sort of cockney, lower-class British culture in South England who lived with the African slaves. A lot of ebonics is actually of South English origin. I think this sort of cultural death is more important than people realize. A people are rooted in their folkways, and so removing it creates a sense of cultural alienation and loss, which is difficult to articulate, but sticks with people for a while. All the wisest Black thinkers stumble into this, or how so much of African culture has been destroyed by whites, leaving Black Americans without a strong sense of identity. The thing is that even if the Latin form of slavery was more brutal, it was inefficient enough that Blacks could keep more of their culture. The efficient capitalism the Anglo-Saxons had kept slaves on a tighter cultural leash than elsewhere. This is partly why Black Americans see so many of the negative cultural effects of modernity earlier than other peoples who receive them later, which we will discuss further on in the video. Also, even though Black slaves had higher qualities of living than a lot of European peasants, I wouldn't use this to say they had better lives, because freedom and self-respect are important things in their own right, where the nobleman is willing to die for his freedom since he holds it to be higher. And I think things like destruction of their culture or degradation or constant inability to control their own lives have negative effects psychologically that are difficult to measure or really keep track of.
All right.
Does that lion have a collar on? Did you see that?
I told this video is triggering. He just says what's on his mind. Yeah. And so he mentioned Thomas Sowell's insight into Black culture actually coming from Southern England. Like, what are your thoughts on that analysis?
I've never heard it go back that far. And I think it's black rednecks and white liberals. A lot of the
Yes.
culture in the antebellum South was that mixture that a lot of blacks had adopted, poor white culture and things like that. So I'm not sure. Like, I think it's an interesting, thought experiment. It would make an interesting research paper as to, are those who are coming over to the new world mixing enslaved culture, and slaves are adopting that vernacular or that type of culture and lifestyle. I don't think Thomas Sowell goes back that far. I don't think he goes back to southern England, but he may. Maybe I'm just not remembering correctly.
Yeah, I think he does. So I had my DNA done through Ancestry, and it used to just say England or Britain or whatever the area or the region was. Well, they got to the point where they can narrow it down now more, and so years ago, Joe Rogan had a guy on who was telling him about Thomas Sowell and this fact that black culture came from the south of England, that ebonics came from there. And Joe Rogan was like amazed. And this guy was saying that, yeah, he said, if you go to certain parts of England, he used this commercial as an example for Devon's custard, right? And he talked about how their vernacular is the exact same as what we call black ebonics, right? And I always found that clip fascinating. Well, when I got my Ancestry, when they narrowed it down, guess where the British part of my heritage came from? It was from
The
Devon.
land of ebonics.
Devon. It was from Devon, England. Like that same region in which they pointed out that is where black ebonics comes from.
That's
and I was like,
hilarious.
it is. I was like, wow, that's crazy.
That's hilarious for real.
Yeah. So I think there's something to it. We've joked that white redneck culture is very similar to black, what we call ghetto culture. Some of the same pathologies and some of the same values. I used to joke around about what was his name? What was the comedian? Jeff Foxworthy. When he used to do the, you might be redneck if, and I related to it because I was like, man, you just changed that to it might be ghetto if, and it was like 1-to-1. Like,
but see, like, okay, so studying sociology, we would have never broke it up into like, well, that's redneck culture and that's, ghetto hood culture. We would have said it's poverty culture. And breaking it down based on class. And so if you're in poverty, you generally find these, these things occurring all the time. So there can be more violence, more theft, more physical assault. Like all of these things are seen more in impoverished communities. Now, I mean, I have some thoughts on that too, but that's not for this show. But I don't know if it's a redneck ratchet, mix up, and there's some shared culture between that and poverty culture, or if one culture breeds the other culture. I'm not sure, but yeah, I don't think in sociology way back then we would have said, oh, this is specifically to the rednecks. We would have said, look at the similarities between people in poverty.
Yeah. And I've thought about that too, and I've gone back and forth because I don't think poverty isn't a culture, and poverty doesn't breed culture. You can be poor and not be ratchet. You can be poor and not be violent.
The same way you can be redneck and not be ratchet, and be redneck and not be violent. So, but I do think that if you look at people who experience poverty, at a specific level, you do see higher rates. And I don't know if it's correlation or causation, but you do see higher rates of violence, higher rates of theft. You see these things in those areas. And again, like I said, I don't know if it's correlation or causation. I think many people would say it's causation. I don't know that I believe that. I'm not sure, because that would take us down like the Rousseau path of like, well,
yeah, and that's what I'm saying.
know?
I don't think poverty causes it. I think the culture leads to poverty. Right? The culture and those values don't lead to flourishing. They don't lead to good things. You're poor because your culture. Right? And because the other side of that is, you know, in America, you have very, very poor Asian communities as well. And yet those pathologies didn't exist and they were poor. Even now you have poor Asian communities. You know, people don't think about it. And in those Asian communities, you do not have the same level of violence, the same, because their culture is a little different in terms of their value system. And so, yeah, your culture can shape, you know, your culture is going to shape your behavior, not the amount of money you have in your bank account.
Yeah.
You know, so that's kind of my thoughts.
I think things like destruction of their culture or degradation or constant inability to control their own lives have negative effects psychologically that are difficult to measure or really keep track of. I mean, for an example that's way more tame, look at how helicopter parenting screwed over Gen Z.
Yeah.
That lion is wearing a collar. I don't know who's pet
you're
this
right.
is.
You're right. Yeah. Somebody got a pet lion over there.
You know what? I ain't even gonna start. I ain't even gonna start. You know, one of the other things that I wanted to talk about before we ended and started again, and sorry to have it be so short, but one of the things that he mentioned was that the peasant was better off than the African or the Black American who was a slave. And he mentioned that even though the Black person may have lived longer, the peasant was better off because they had their freedom. Yes. One of the things that I realized today is that even though we have our freedom, many Black people in America would rather fight and die to be attached to a system than to actually have the freedom that comes through hard work and doing the self-reliance and meritocracy and all of those things. It is the complete shift that these people way back when, peasants, were dying for their freedom and dying to remain free while the slave was living longer. Today, we are willing to die to be attached to a system that enslaves.
Man, you're right. I can't remember who it was. It might have been April Chapman was talking about this in terms of when the slaves were free, there were slaves who chose to stay on the plantation rather than go out and exercise their freedom, right?
Yeah. I think Booker T. Washington talks about that too.
Yeah. And so I think there is some of that because freedom is responsibility. Freedom is the unknown. Freedom is, you know, we see it in scripture when, you know, Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt. What do they say? They start grumbling. Let us go back. At least we were fed and at least we were, you know, taken care of, right? There is this sense of being willing to stay in bondage because it's comfortable.
Yeah.
Right. And I do think a lot of Black people, even today, even though it's a more of a not a literal slavery, right? Or, you know, but I think there are a lot of people who are afraid to detach themselves from the victim narrative because once you do, what excuse do you have?
Yes.
Who do you blame?
Yes.
Right. And so it's more comfortable to stay in the mental oppression of victimhood than it is to exercise and live in your freedom.
And I would say not only that, but we have taught that to other people. And our government has perpetuated that narrative and helped us to believe that as long as you stay connected to us and basically be enslaved in your mind to this way of thinking, we will take care of you. But I mean, you're exchanging literally your freedom for the slavery of the government connectedness. This is not simply a Black issue in my opinion.
No.
I think, you know, there are many cultures, many ethnic groups in America that attach themselves to the government. We can even look at it, take the government out of it, and needing to be a victim, needing to be marginalized in order to be able to get your clout in society. This is why we have so many white girls who are now jumping on that LGBTQ plus bandwagon and painting their hair purple and blue. It's because they need to either align themselves and become an ally with someone who is a victim, or they need to be the victim themselves. There is so much goodness
Mm-hmm.
in being seen as a victim.
Yeah. And he's going to try to tie some things back culturally from the Black community to Africa that I want to talk about once we get to that I think is kind of interesting as well.
And having lived in Africa, I would love to hear this because I do have some thoughts.
All right. Well, let's go.
All right.
That there are a few taboo points which authors on this topic keep stumbling on, but don't really know how to discuss politely. For example, I find it kind of funny that David Hackett Fisher was known for his brilliant book, Albion Seed, which is about how different British diasporas populated America, creating the different subcultures which still dominate American life today in almost every way possible. Back in the 80s when he released Albion Seed, he said the next book he would write would be on the cultural impact of African slavery on America. He waited 40 years to write that book, being African Founders. I was kinda disappointed since he's nearly 100 years old now, and so he'll never write the whole series on American cultural history, which I wanted so much. Where are the books on the cultural impact of the Catholic migrants to the Northeast, the settlement of the American West, or the American Empire? American cultural history is my thing, so if he wrote that series, it would have been incalculably valuable to me. I had already read a lot on this topic before I read African Founders a few years ago, and I had already stumbled onto the topics I knew he would have issues covering. I was curious how we would cover them, and I found he did a very good but sensitive job. The main issue authors stumble into while going into this field, apart from the politically incorrect things said already, is that lots of the antisocial behaviors we see from African Americans have cultural parallels in Africa. That's something which is completely obvious if you know anything about anthropology or human nature, but is somehow taboo to say in this culture. For example, crime and murder rates in America are correlated by race. White Americans have murder and crime rates identical to European countries, Asian Americans to Asia, and Africans to Africa. This is the origin of the whole meme that 13% of wizards cast a majority of spells, an indirect play on the crime stats in America. The thing to keep in mind is that cultural change has to be organic and stem from the context itself. People and cultures learn through experiences and making mistakes. Besides genetic differences, which we know with complete certainty do exist, but are too taboo to study scientifically now, so it's difficult to draw conclusions as to their scope yet, these sociological differences in development between Africa and Europe were great enough that they can't be bridged immediately. Furthermore, African Americans were largely not pulled from the more developed and urbanized African states in the Sahel, but from the jungle tribal coastlines. We see this easily in the tragedy that modern South Africa has become, or how you deal with different civilizations which are thousands of years apart in development, which require vastly different things for their own good. Sub-Saharan Africa, besides a certain amount in the Sahel, had never gone through a commercial revolution, the Axial Age, the rise of continental-sized empires, or the rise and fall of civilizations. This is just obvious, but it's taboo to say for some reason, but different cultures at different levels of development need different things. It's more useful to see sub-Saharan Africa as part of the New World, or tribal cultures like Australia or the Americas, which were dragged into the global system by the European age of exploration, rather than Eurasia, which developed entrenched civilizations connected together by thousands of years of contacts.
Okay, he done went far.
Yeah.
Them graphics on the screen, I said, sir. And he's also putting forward some thoughts that I think I disagree with. It's not that, there's all these genetic differences between the human species.
No,
and we have this group and they're a completely different group. That isn't true. You can check out the Human Genome Project to find out the genetic distinctions between people groups and see that it's very, very small. It's a minute distinction.
Yeah.
And, you know, like when we argue about like skin color and hair type and all that, that would be more just micro adaptations. I believe the biggest difference in people are between the, is it Africans and Aborigines in Australia, or Black Americans and Aborigines, but it's still a negligible distinction.
Yeah. I think his analysis on sociological developments of culture and societies and culture is much more relevant than genetics. Understanding, it is important to realize that African slaves were taken from very tribal and jungle type regions and thrown into a way more advanced civilization type of environment and culture, right? There's going to be a lot of just culture shock when it comes to that. And so, I think that has way more value than the whole genetic argument, right?
I think so too. I bring up the genetic argument that he uses because it can be used by those on the far right to say, see, Black people aren't, or you see this group here isn't, or by hyper woke Blacks on the left to be, well, white people, and it's not true. And so that's part of, like, even though I can agree with much of what he's saying in this video, we have to also review things with wisdom and using discernment and listening and be like, no, I call cap on that, because that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And it's also very easy to look at elements of Black culture today and then assume that that's just always been the case. Like I said, so we know that this was not always the case. At one point in time, Blacks, had higher marriage rates than whites coming out of slavery in the 1920s to 1930s, right? And so we can talk about, okay, what happened to the decline of Black culture, but Black culture coming out of slavery was way different than what we experience today, because it was heavily rooted in a Christian faith, a biblical Christian faith, right? That was super religious. And those Blacks coming out of that were completely different culturally than 1990s inner city ghetto culture, right? This is a much more new phenomenon, we would say, since the 1950s or 60s, right? Where the Black culture started to decline. You start to have a lot of out of wedlock birth rates, and and so it's almost like, well, you can't just act like there's just this continuous level of savagery from the coast of Africa to the day. Like, no, because when you had, you're talking about hundreds of years of development, hundreds of years of slaves who were just born in this context and know nothing of Africa, right? And know nothing of the culture of Africa. Like he said, we lost our culture. We conformed to the culture in which we were in. And so you can't then go back and then try to blame it on some type of African culture or development, right?
Yes. Hey family, I wanted to take a minute and talk to you about Birmingham Theological Seminary. It's my seminary, and it's a place that I extremely appreciate. They have small class sizes, very reasonable tuition, and professors who are committed to your education and to my education. If you are looking to extend your theological education and are considering seminary, I encourage you to check out Birmingham Theological Seminary. You can go to bts.education for more information. I'm glad that he hit on South Africa, because that's where I live.
Yes, I saw you perk up. What
I was like, what we doing? What we doing? And part of what I noticed when I first went in 2010 was, wow, there are so many similarities to hood American culture and some of the Black and colored South African culture that I see.
Yeah.
And so I went, for a couple of years to South Africa on short trips before I moved there. When I eventually moved there, well, my short trips, I was still noticing and wondering, like, how can these two groups live on different continents, have completely different lives and different cultures, and yet baby daddy syndrome is strong. The matriarch is strong. And I'm not talking about like the good version of the matriarch. I'm talking about
Yeah.
the matriarch, like the man is gone and the mother and the grandmother, like they're just the ones who continue the lineage and things like that.
Yeah.
Drug culture strong, gang violence is huge. When I moved there, I realized, these people have TV.
Uh-huh.
They
Yep.
have access to the internet, the
Yes.
interwebs. And so a lot of this is a mimic of
Yeah.
American culture. When I
Yes.
worked in an area called the Cape Flats, they have the Junkie Funky Kids, JFKs. They have the Americans, which is a gang down there. There is a looking at by some, I'm not going to say by all, but by some in Africa, throughout the continent, that this is the way that I live my life. This is what's good, because this is what comes through TV of what Black Americans do. I was in Uganda last year, and people, I was in church and they were worshiping, they were playing Fred Hammond. I mean, they was taking it home. They was gone, running. I said, where'd you learn this? Where'd they learn it? They learned it on TV. They learned it by watching Black church.
Yeah.
And when you ask them, why do you participate this way, as opposed to participating in the ways that your culture dictates for worship? Well, it's because this is what's cool. This is what Black Americans do.
Yeah.
And so I take issue. It's not that, slaves or post-slavery Black Americans and Africans today share some hood ratchet DNA. That's BS. Like that's I call cap. No.
Yeah.
What it is that sadly, ratchet hood America has imported this, much like we have imported the critical social theories into the African continent. And this is how they participate.
Yeah. It's clearly culture and the export of culture. We know American culture, good and bad, gets exported all over the world.
Yes.
And yeah, it's you see it in these. I will say this. I realized years ago that American culture, in terms of what we're talking about, gang violence, the murders and stuff, a lot of that stuff correlated with two things: the creation of rap music, gangster rap, and the creation of certain movies that kind of glorified the lifestyle.
Yep.
In the late 80s, there was a movie called Colors.
Colors.
Yeah. Colors helped spread. So you had these gangs in LA, in Chicago, but the movie Colors helped spread that idea to parts of the country where it didn't exist before.
Yep.
Right. And so then people start mimicking that behavior. And then you got Menace to Society, Boys in the Hood, New Jack City, Juice, all of these early 90s movies that really glorified this gangster type rap and lifestyle, along with, like I said, the creation of gangster rap music. And all of a sudden you have this cultural explosion of violence in the early to mid 90s of just murders and people killing each other and the drug game and it was crazy, but that didn't exist before, right? It just didn't exist before, and it's just this crazy uptick in violence, and that's a cultural phenomenon. That's not genetics, and so we export. Not only did we export it across the country, we then export it overseas.
Yes, across the water.
Yeah, across the water. Yeah.
Yes. And I don't think we take time enough to realize how much Black culture influences basically every other continent. And there is an influence of just our culture and behaviors and things like that. And we can and should take some responsibility in that. Like, we have, created much of the ideas that people think are now virtuous
Yeah.
in other parts of the world. And I would say I saw that, firsthand in South Africa, as people would drive down the street, blasting Tupac or Eazy-E, or you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And I'll say this too. It's easier to mimic the culture of people who look like you.
yes.
So like I saw a video, it was in Korea, and they was interviewing Koreans, asking them what they thought about black people. And everything they were saying, black people are so cool and this and that. They want to mimic the fashion, but they're not mimicking to the T. They're not mimicking the lifestyle. They're not mimicking the behavior.
They got us in dance. Them the Koreans, I mean,
yeah.
They come over here and like take dance classes up the wazoo. That's the only thing I know about that.
Yeah. And so, but when it's someone who looks like you, right, in terms of black culture in America being exported to Africa, it's much easier to think that is the way I should live because that's how they live and that's what's cool and that's what's, and so you get a much more mimicking of the behavior, right? It's like, I think at one point it was like 70% of rap music was bought by white kids in America.
Yep.
So they were listening to it and they were rocking to it, but they weren't trying to live the lifestyle on the street.
Yes.
The way the black kids were trying to mimic what they were seeing.
Yes.
It's just a different level of mimicking and influence. Go ahead.
I would say in South Africa, they don't want to necessarily be Black American, but they do want the fast money that they think comes with the ratchetness of the culture. They want that benefit. But I can't walk into any, township and ask someone who's Xhosa if they want to be Black. They would tell you no. First of all, they would tell you that you basically synonymous with white because you're American. But they don't want that, and neither does the colored person in South Africa. There is such a pride in your ethnic group that they don't want that, but that culture, that fast life, that the swag that comes with it and all of that, they definitely want that.
Yeah. Side note, all of that culture and swag you're talking about, white European women, they love Black American men because of that. Just FYI.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. FYI, the passport bros, just saying. Go to Europe. You high demand.
That's funny. That's funny for real. That's funny for real. I'm gonna leave that alone. All the way along because we gotta go. We gotta keep going.
All right, let's keep diving in.
All right.
This is why it's so much easier for Indians, Middle Easterners, or Chinese immigrants to adapt to the modern capitalist market than Native Americans or Africans. It's not fair that these cultures were shoved into a global order, which they were never really prepared for, but life has never pretended to be fair either. All of these cultures are stuck with the issue of catching up to thousands of years of experience that Eurasia had, but they didn't. At least some Africans are making a valiant effort to do so today. However, in the grand scheme of things, the Africans have done significantly better than the Amerindians or Australian Aboriginals in the new global order, since they didn't die from European illnesses in the same way those peoples did. In fact, they unwittingly played the disease card on the Europeans in the way they did to those Aboriginal peoples. If you read enough on the anthropology of Africa, you will notice similarities in African Americans and Africans. This is something that the Thomas Sowell school of thought disagrees with, saying African Americans are basically Englishmen now. Although I respect Sowell enormously, this clearly isn't true. If you compare the behavior of African chieftains or dictators to rappers, there are similarities faced by the struggle of African Americans adapting to a very advanced, delayed gratification, capitalist educated society. For a frame of reference, if Irish or Italian Americans took a century to assimilate into Anglo-American society, of course Africans will face big issues. Part 2, intermission.
All right.
I think
he said a lot.
He did say a lot. Yeah, and I disagree. I don't know that it is easier for one group to assimilate. I think that there are groups who work harder at assimilation. I also think that there's been, at least when I was in school, I was taught that Asians tended to assimilate faster than other ethnic groups, immigrating into America. But I don't know if that's because they have something in their bones that make them assimilate more, if they're smarter and that's why they assimilate more faster. I wonder if there's something in the drive and in the goal, like is it a goal-oriented culture? And in order for us to get A, B, and C, we know that assimilation is going to be needed. I
Yeah.
wonder if there is a lack of trust among some groups, especially some Black American groups that have been here, African descendants of slaves, that do not trust still, especially as we recount stories. And we know that whoever owns the history, basically, I feel like will own the future as well. And as history is recounted to us and we only hear this one horrible side of history with slavery and things like that, does that breed a distrust in us for things like capitalism, for the government? And then we intentionally opt out of assimilation.
Yeah. Yeah. And then just his talking about comparing African leaders to rappers. I'm like, if I compare African leaders to leaders in South America, I'm going to get the same thing. If I compare African leaders to leaders in parts of Russia and Eastern Europe, I'm going to get the same thing, right? There's some similarities across all of those because it's all just corruption, right? It's all, whether it's ruling with an iron fist and just being corrupt for your own benefit. I see that as a human thing across many continents, not just Black leaders in Africa to rappers. Even though you might see some emulation, like we were just talking about, of that particular culture. The fact that Thomas Sowell said we're Englishmen now, right? Basically saying we're Americans.
Yeah.
I think that is true, and people outside America will tell you that's true.
Yes.
When Black people go somewhere, we're not Black Americans. They're like, oh no, you're American.
You're American.
We have a shared culture.
Yes. No matter how much you try to reject it inside of America, go outside of America and you are American. You're Black American, you're just American.
Yeah. And so like I said, I like this guy, but I disagree with him. I think he leans way more into the evolutionary thought process. And I do understand because like Frank, you ever heard of Frank Zanu? He's that African guy that was talking about maintenance. There's no African word for maintenance. I don't know if you've ever seen that clip. But anyway, he's an African guy, and he talks a lot about this type of stuff. And he does make some good points from a cultural standpoint. When so you take these European leaders, right, and you colonize Africa, and you run it, and then one day you leave and you say, okay, here you go. Well, the people you conquered, they're taking over something they've never run before. Like, it's very Western, and it's the democracy and all of these concepts that aren't native to the people of that land, and now they're trying to run it now that the Europeans are gone, right? And he's like, you wonder why it doesn't work, because you're trying to run something that is not of your culture, and he does make some good points in that. He talks about Haiti, or the fact of, look who was captured and brought over to the West in terms of slavery. It wasn't, and now the Haitians, they kick out the French, and now they're going to run the country. They never run anything.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of people who've never run anything. They never built anything. They were tribal people who are now in a Western civilization trying to run a nation. And we wonder why it doesn't go well, right? And so there is some sense of cultural adaptability over time, and trying to have one group of people adapt into a larger cultural context and environment. And it does take time. It takes generations, right? But at the same time, when you think about Black America, and this is what bothers me, because we try to paint it as if the YN culture in the street is Black America.
Yeah, no.
Like, we have assimilated.
Yeah.
Mostly. Like most of us aren't in the street, aren't in ghetto culture. Most of us aren't doing that, but it gets framed that way. It's like, no, we've been here 400 years now. We got it, you know. Now there are some pathologies in terms of single motherhood and the breakdown of marriage in the Black culture, but that's breaking down across America in general.
Yeah.
But in terms of in a capitalist society and all this blah, 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 it's 400 years. We good. We have it.
One of the things that, you know, and I don't know if this guy's a Christian. I don't believe he is. Just listening to some things, but it would be interesting to see the impact of Christianity. Like, you're looking at, you know, tribal kings and rap artists who I can say might both be pagan. You know, how did the influx of Christianity shift the way people participated?
That is a huge point.
I
said, no, it's a huge point, because that's the difference we make within the Black community. Those who embrace the Christian ethic and worldview versus those who did not.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that's going to be the difference you find within the cultural context.
Yes.
Europe didn't just get like that because they're white, right? They got like that because of the influx of Christian values and influence that shaped their culture over, you know, nearly 2,000 years. And so, that gets left out.
It does, but it's important to note, you know, like Christianity has a huge influence, not just here in America, not in Europe, but also on the African continent. And it has had an influence on the African continent basically since the time of Christ's death, when the first disciples came over onto the African continent, starting in the upper eastern part of Africa. And so it's important to think that through and not just look at things through this anthropological lens or this sociological lens all the time, even though I think anthropology and sociology are great. And we should know these things and ask questions. Again, if we're not looking at things through a biblical lens, and then two, listening critically, and when I say critically, I'm talking about critical thinking, we'll just be off believing that, you know, the tribal African from, you know, 1590 and the Black guy in South Central Los Angeles in 2025 are really just brothers.
I think that's a good point. But I'm with you. I think the big difference, what we see, is just the influence of Christianity. Even within Africa, those who have been influenced by Christianity versus those who have not. Those who are more influenced, whether it's by pagan religions or even those who are more influenced by the East and socialism and communism. That's like, people don't, when we talk about Africa and all the issues, that's something we do not talk about enough. Is the influence of socialism and communism on the African continent.
Yes.
It plays a large role in their lack of development. That's what socialism does. You know, but after colonialism, by nature, there was a anti-Western, anti-capitalist mindset in Africa, and a lot of those revolutionary leaders that rose up, you know, they were revolutionary because they were socialists, they were Marxists, they were communists, right? And so, that has really hurt Africa's development.
And it continues to hurt Africa's development. I think of Julius Malema, who is over the Socialist Party in South Africa today. Yeah. It's not helping.
No, it's not. And then the influx of Islam. You know, in places like Nigeria and Sudan, and, you know, it's just there are issues there that go way beyond anthropology, I guess you could say, you know, or some type of genetic things. And so I think that's a good place for us to stop for this episode.
Yeah, I mean, we made it all the way to the what do you call it?
Intermission.
Intermission. Yeah, I was like concession. No, intermission. Yeah, and I think weren't we only going to the intermission?
I think so. Because after that, it gets out of slavery and just really gets more like the civil rights stuff.
Yeah.
And so, so we pretty much wanted to cover the slavery portion because that is the portion that is very unfamiliar to a lot of people. And it invokes a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts of how do we get here? Because I love that. I love like even from the European perspective of the different people who came over here and settled America, and why America is just so different region to region. Like why is the Southeast different than the Northeast?
Yeah.
And why is the Midwest different than out West? Like it's because these different groups from Europe settled in different areas. And so just understanding that stuff, I've always found that stuff interesting. And then you throw, the history of black slavery in there, and then the Great Migration out of that, and just understanding all of these complex things that go on and happen. And and so I thought it was a good idea to understand the slavery aspect and just kind of how that plays into what we see today.
Well, thanks for walking us through it. You know what I wish? I wish he would have looked at the slaves that went east. And I know that wasn't the context of the video or what his project is, but in addition to looking at Christianity's impact on the African continent, looking at, like you're saying, like we talk about Islam in Nigeria today or in the Congo, but Islam's influence on slave holding Africa and slave sending Africa and how those people were treated. And then looking into Islamic countries today where there are, blacks because of the descendants of slaves and the way that those people are treated. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. But no, this was interesting. I'm glad we got a chance to do it and to finish it today. So
yes, 3 parts.
Yep.
We came, we saw, we conquered.
Yep. So if you guys want to see the rest of it, because he does go on, the link will be in the description, and you guys can watch the full video for yourselves.
Awesomeness. Thanks for putting this together, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Yep, no problem.
All right, you guys, if you would like to support the ministry of the Center for Biblical Unity, please go to centerforbiblicalunity.com and you can support our ministry there. Until then, we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.